I'm going to call you a veteran, Grace, but in the nicest possible way, because this is not your first time speaking at Responsible Raw Materials. So thank you very, very much for coming back to be with us here today. I'm really lucky in that Grace and I get to bump into one another at many, many conferences and events around the world, which is truly wonderful because I always know that we're going to have a great conversation. There's always going to be fantastic insight. And Grace, thank you for being one of those people at all those conferences around the world where I can truly be myself with. So yes, thank you for providing the safe space for a proper conversation wherever we might be. So with that, please put your hands together for the fabulous Grace. Over to you.
Wow, what a kind introduction, Sarah. Thank you so much. I don't know where I can go from there, really. Um, I'll just start by introducing myself, I guess. I'm Grace Yungwirth. I'm a director of mining, mine water, and sustainability at WSP Mining and Metals. I'm really happy to be here today presenting on future-proofing the bottom line, talking about building resilience through resource stewardship. I'll just double check you can see my screen okay. Yes, great. Fantastic. So a quick look at the agenda. I'll take you through the concept of resource stewardship and some examples on how it can be practically applied to increase resilience, tying to the theme of the conference through the mining life cycle. So I'm here today to discuss how resource stewardship enables project resilience. And as most people would understand, the key to success for most mining and metals projects is smooth, uninterrupted production, followed by efficient transition through to closure. And so most mining projects are not stopped by geology alone. They are often interrupted through unmanaged resource, social, or environmental, or delivery risks. In the world today, I think it's fair to see, and it's really visible for most people now, that competition for resources such as water, excuse me, energy, carbon, land, and nature is just increasing, and it's only going to increase. And these resources are also the same resources that underpin stable production and social license. So really what we've seen as a shift in the industry is that sustainability and resource stewardship has moved beyond reporting and it's become core business embedded in mainstream decision making for most miners. And we're talking about data-led approaches to target setting as an imperative. And really, my take-home message is that proactive stewardship is essential to secure reliable long-term access to these resources, which then allows you to maintain production and reduce legacy liability and sustain value creation. So my background is in mine water, and you'll probably see that come through in some of the images that are on the screen, but I've chosen here as well to first talk about water stewardship. Um, so I'll introduce this concept quickly. Water stewardship's been around for a long time, but those who aren't aware, the definition is the use of water in ways that are socially equitable, environmentally sustainable, and economically beneficial. And when I think about this, I always think of beyond the fence line. It's a nice image to help you think about use of water for of all the users in the catchment equitably. Um, and really, when you're thinking about this, you're talking about forward-looking water strategies that involve integrate climate variability, cumulative impacts in the catchment, and considers project and portfolio decisions. What we've learned over the last while as an industry is that one-size-fits-all targets are really not effective. You can imagine if you have a corporate water stewardship strategy and then you have a diverse portfolio of projects across different hydrological or operational contexts, their needs for water stewardship are going to be very different. Different mines use different amounts of water. They might be in arid regions. They might be in non-arid regions. It's just not one size fits all at all. So really what you need are regional and operation specific targets that align to your material project risks. And this is pulling in some of the thoughts that Rainey actually already mentioned earlier. So thank you for that. Which reduces the chance that your production will be stopped either by lack of or too much water or social license restrictions. So in practice, how is this achieved? And I'd like to share one example on the next slide of a major miner's water strategy, which was recently made available publicly, and it's a good example. So this is Anglo American's water stewardship strategy, and it really is a great example of a portfolio-led approach to water stewardship. And you can see that they've done a great job in the image there on the left of integrating site water management with catchment-based management, with collective action from all water users, integrating stakeholder dialogue. And their targets then are translated into very business specific targets aligned with the local water priorities in both water scarce and non-water scarce regions. So I'll first start talking about those targets in the orange box, which is the water scarce regions. So if you look at Anglo's operations in Chile, their focus there is on zero freshwater extraction, which is important to the local communities that also use that resource. If you look at Kumba iron ore, the focus is on ecosystem resilience and equitable water access and using tools like things like groundwater recharge to resupply the communities and the ecosystems. If you think about Peru, the focus is on water security and access. So you'll see that even in what might be considered similar environments or all water scarce, the focus it changes depending on the stakeholder needs, which is great practice. Then if you go up to the blue box, which is Brazil, the operations in Brazil, this is a non-arid environment where water is available in the basin, but it has high rainfall variability and periodic drought conditions. And they've really addressed water quality pressures in this environment where you're looking at protection of watersheds and operational systems to manage the physical risk of this high rainfall and periodic drought conditions. So I don't actually work for Anglo American, but they are one of our clients. And I will just say my own personal opinion is this is not from Anglo, that this is a great example of aligning their water stewardship strategy with the material risks of each portfolio, which has helped them build resilience for their operations. Now, you might ask, is there a role for policy in driving resource stewardship approach? And I would say, of course, there is. The leaders in this space are generally water scarce regions, although there's others because there's policy from overarching bodies like ICMM. But we'll just look quickly at what South Africa is doing as an example first. So in South Africa, the policy has been driven by the Department of Water and Sanitation, the Water Research Commission, the Minerals Council of South Africa, and their partners, including companies like ours, WSP, and others. And what they've done here is they've set up several different mechanisms to support the industry. So at a national level, they have a really transparent process set out in the operational rules for water supply to allocate catchment level resources. And so this involves the technical pieces like modeling and planning, and then they allocate the water to stakeholders based on a really transparent process. And they also have things like action plans put in place to help, excuse me, improve water supply and efficiency amongst their users. Then they also have another industry support tool, which is, it's a mouthful, the Water Conservation Water Demand Management Tool, which allows operators to understand their awareness, to support benchmarking, and to understand where they are in terms of progress. And this has been really effective in South Africa. There's some references there to the appropriate places at the bottom of the screen if you want to learn more about that. And next, I'll just have to credit some of my colleagues for studying and sharing their learnings on the implementation of this tool, which I'll talk about on this next slide. And really here, the message is that it's operators that engage and drive these tools. And when they do that, it leads to really positive outcomes like ensuring accurate representation of water supply systems. So all the stakeholders are aware of their water supply and demand position, And then the mining industry, in turn, has a systematic approach to managing their water supply and demand with a continuous feedback loop to help conditions improve. And the key takeaway when looking at this implementation is that you cannot future-proof mining operations and resource requirements without proactive multi-stakeholder engagement and improved measurement and modeling. And again, I think this aligns as well with some of the previous talks, which is great to see. So this is a great example of where policy-led positive resource stewardship outcomes are based on good technical practice and this stakeholder engagement. So lastly, I would have to say, if you're trying to future-proof your producing asset, you really should be considering the entire asset life cycle, including integrated mine closure. From the ICMM Good Practice Guide, this involves dynamic and iterative processes that considers all of these necessary parameters like environmental, social, and economic factors from early stage in mine development through the life of an asset. So this is really viewing mine closure as an integrated part of mine operations core business and embedding the objectives early so that you can actually really make a difference in design elements instead of retrofitting closure solutions at the end of the mine life. And what this does is allows the cost to run during operational phases and for operators to avoid legacy liabilities. And given that my mine closure colleagues tell me that about 70% of mines close unexpectedly, which is an interesting statistic, managing this risk and cost is essential to running a resilient operation. And the next slide, I'll present a positive example of how this can be done. Okay, so on this slide, we're presenting an example of progressive mine closure at Ada Tepe Gold Mine in Bulgaria, which is run by DPM Metals. And you can see there, there's a mine waste facility. I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but there's two V valleys, and these are the fronts of the mine waste facilities that look like a V on the screen if you couldn't see my pointer there. And they are being progressively rehabilitated as the facility is being built up and as production is running. And this aligns with the ICMM integrated mine closure practice, which emphasizes this closure planning from early stages. And it also has a direct benefit to water, carbon, nature, biodiversity, stakeholders, and the balance sheet, which is an important one. And now, I have to say again, focusing on water because that's my preference. Is that there was a really fantastic quote by one of the attendees of the PASTE conference in Portugal earlier this month, Sonia Finucane, who said, "Water outlasts all other closure challenges," and I couldn't agree more. But I know I'm slightly biased there. And this is really a good example as well of early design decisions, reducing the long-term water treatment risks, enhancing stability, and reducing the post-closure liabilities just by integrating that thought process in the design. You can also see that this approach would reduce the need to rehandle materials, which also helps you align on reduced energy needs and allows for early reclamation of the land and nature, leaving less environmental and financial risk for post-closure activities. So you can imagine if this mine just happened to be one of that 70% that closed unexpectedly, the liability would be significantly mitigated by the approach they've taken here. So on to my closing slide. Hopefully I've managed to convince you or even demonstrate technically that there's an increasing business advantage and resilience when you plan mining responsibly to use less energy, water, and natural resources to do so. And that always involves positively integrating environment and communities from the project startup through the whole asset life cycle to closure. By managing these risks, you help protect your license to operate, you have operational continuity, so less likely of production disruption, and increased long-term value. This also strengthens stakeholder certainty for all your stakeholders and involves setting and delivering on meaningful portfolio specific, that's an important one, targets that help mining companies meet their commitments, also help them building stronger, more resilient businesses ready to thrive in this uncertain world. There's a good quote there. And with that, I'll say thank you all for your attention.
Grace, as always, thank you so much. Everyone, round of applause for the fantastic Grace Yungwirth. That's brilliant. Um, Grace, as always, there are lots of fantastic comments and questions coming in. And also, we've had a number of other talks already this week that have focused on the topic of water. You'll be delighted to hear. My first question, though, is around you described what the companies can do, especially with regards to that more specific setting of targets and that portfolio approach, and then also what governments can do from a policy perspective. But thinking about who actually triggers that improvement or that change? Is it often the companies? Is it the governments? Is it communities? Is it the investors? Who often pushes for these changes that we often know we need to make?
So that's a fantastic question. And I think the reality here is that the environment is changing. I
Mm,
think over the past while, it's been stakeholders like investors and governments. But actually, I would argue, from my experience, is that as I said, most mining companies now understand that there's a real business advantage here. And
mm,
they've pushed these considerations into their risk management, their core business planning. They might not be calling it ESG or sustainability at the moment because of the
mm.
political climate, but they're doing it. They
Yeah.
are absolutely doing it as a matter of, a business necessity.
And I
I mean,
think
I'm not sure, I'm sort of saying the entire industry is there, but that's the trend. That's the trend we're seeing.
so, so with that, and Lucy's got a great question in the chat that follows on from that. And she's saying, well, it sounds like some of the majors are doing really well. You gave the example from Anglo American, and I used to work there, as you know. So I was like, oh, well done, Grace, excellent. But I remember, to your point, when I was living and working in Brazil, which was awesome, we would have to shut down the entire operation because we'd run out of water. And we had all the rights to extract the water, but because somebody else was mining nearby, they were drawing down the water table, etc. So lots and lots of conversations, lots of quite early days climate modeling to try and understand what might be happening in terms of precipitation levels, all of that kind of stuff. But that's what Anglo could do at the time. And I'm not saying that Anglo is the best company in the world. There are lots of problems. But what about the smaller sized producers? Are they able to do this? Are they better? Are they worse? Or are they just different depending on where they are around the world?
Yeah, so also a really good question. So what I'd say over my career working in mine water, at the beginning, I definitely had to sell to mine operators the value of effective and proactive water management. It was something that was seen as a cost that was unnecessary, maybe a nice to have. And again, it's just so encouraging and positive now that, again, businesses understand that if you don't get water right, your production stops.
Hmm.
And there's lots of good examples of this, and that materially affects their bottom line.
Hmm.
So I don't think this is just a major thing. This is not a nice to have in the industry. And the one example that I did present from DPM Metals, I mean, they're mid-tier seam. I think, okay, they're a little more mature as well. But we're seeing a lot of our junior miners as well, very interested in making sure that they're managing their water risk proactively. Now, sometimes there's still a little bit of sales involved or explanation to understand why, but I think the industry as a whole has really matured in this space, and that's incredibly encouraging for me to see as a practitioner. And the science has moved along as well in terms of what you can predict and what you can do, and just the understanding that that whole catchment, that stewardship approach, is so essential. Because as you say, it might not be something you're doing, it might be something your neighbor's doing that can then affect your operations and your cash flow.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Now, Grace, there are more questions coming in the chat, but I'll let you address them in writing. But everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Grace. Absolutely brilliant. Cheers, mate.